Hi and welcome to another episode of Delaware County Political News, Meet the Expert. I am your host, Larry DeMarco, and we are here with Jodine Mayberry. She has been working as a journalist and writer for nearly 50 years. Jodine started at the Mount Holly Herald, a weekly paper in Burlington County, New Jersey, where she met her late husband, Stuart Rose, while he was serving at Fort Dix during the Vietnam War. They worked together at the Trentonian newspaper for 13 years. Then she came here, where he was hired as the editor of the Delaware County Daily Times in 1981. Jodine worked for a year at the Delaware County Bureau for the Daily News from 1983 to 1984, and then worked for a textbook company for another 10 years. In 94, she worked for nearly a year at the Philadelphia Bureau of the New York Times, then worked for an office of Westlaw in Wayne for the next 17 years. Jodine, thank you for being a guest at Delaware County Political News.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Larry.
Jodine, what are you working on now?
Well, I'm in my third stint as a columnist for the Delaware County Daily Times. I did an early stint around the 1990s, early 90s, and then a few years ago until I broke my arm and I had to quit, and then this year I came back. I felt I had to come back because of the political situation over the last year.
Well, for those of us who read you, we are certainly glad that you did.
Oh, thank you.
Jodine, what is the Encyclopedia of Greater Philadelphia, which I understand you also write for?
Yes. Well, it was a project that the Rutgers University launched. They got a grant, and so they wanted to do. They wanted to put together an encyclopedia about all things Philadelphia and Delaware, Bucks, Montgomery County, and southern New Jersey. And I got into it because I have a good friend of mine was involved in it. And although most of the pieces are written by history students and historians, they asked me to do some of it because of my legal background.
What did you write for the Encyclopedia of Greater Philadelphia?
I wrote a piece about media, the building of media, one of the earliest planned communities. I wrote a piece about Delaware County and about the lawyers and law practice in Philadelphia, and also about how the term Philadelphia lawyer came about. And I wrote a piece about Abscam, the 1970s scandal that brought down several politicians, including a few in Philadelphia.
And for anyone who wants to see that, they are all posted online, correct?
Yes, it's the Encyclopedia of Greater Philadelphia. It's only online. You can look it up by topic, or you can just search my name and those pieces will come up. Of
course, we're Delaware County Political News, so we're interested in media in Delaware County. Mm-hmm. What research did you do for those pieces? Oh, it was incredible. I did history books, almanacs, newspaper articles. The list just went on and on. It's very, very extensive research. How'd you get roped into that?
I got roped into it because a friend of mine, Howard Gillette, is a historian at Rutgers, and he was involved in the project, and so he asked me to write those pieces for it. Actually, I think the adding pieces to the encyclopedia has come to an end, which is too bad because there were several other things I wanted to write about Delaware County, like the 1917 Eddystone explosion that killed 130 people. The Corinthos explosion, and there was a ship taking troops to Europe that was lost during World War II that almost all of the young men in Chester were on, and they were lost on this one ship. And I wanted to do an article about that. Never been able to find out the name of the ship. I'm still looking.
Well, if you find it and you want to come back to Delaware County Political News and discuss it, you're certainly welcome back.
That was a very, very, very traumatic thing for the people of Chester at the time.
It certainly sounds like it. How far back does your research go?
Well, I went back to 1682, which is when William Penn landed in Chester. He landed in Chester. That was going to be his provincial capital. It was named Chester because most of the people that came over with him on the Welcome were Quakers from Cheshire. And so supposedly someone on the ship suggested the name of Chester. It was a little Swedish town of Uppland before that. So he was going to make it his provincial capital, but it was hemmed in by farmland owned by a man named Sandeland. And Mr. Sandeland would not sell him his farmland, so then William Penn had to get back in the ship and go 12 miles up the river and land in Philadelphia. So he was actually here first. And there is a marker on the Chester waterfront that shows the spot where they believe he landed.
As you know, we residents of Delaware County are proud of our hometown. How did Delaware County begin? And I know one of the stories about separation doesn't appear. Tell that story. Okay. Well, the original, William Penn had 3 counties, or 3 provinces. Bucks County, what became Bucks County, Philadelphia, and Chester County. And the Chester province ran all the way to the Susquehanna River, which is 100 miles or more. So farmers could not come from that great a distance to come to town for market or for court or for legal matters. And they almost immediately began complaining about the size of the county. So in 1729, the state, I guess it was the colonial legislature, split off Lancaster County from Chester County, so that far western part of the county was taken care of. But people still kept complaining. The layout of Delaware County, what was then Chester County, it's all hilly, it's all got little creeks. There are no navigable rivers. So to come to Chester for anything required that they come over atrocious roads, really trails, wide enough for a horse. And in the spring, the roads were so muddy that wagons couldn't pass. So the people in the western part of Chester County continued to complain up until the 1780s. You know, the Revolutionary War had taken place by then. So they again wanted to split off. What happened first, though, was that the legislature agreed to allow a new county seat to be built in Westchester, 1.5 miles from Goshen. So they started to build the new counties, the new courthouse and the jail, and the people of Chester were very upset because they felt they were going to lose their livelihoods. So a man named, I think his name was John Harper, he was a Revolutionary War major, led a group of Chesterites up to where they were building the new courthouse in Westchester. By the way, those people in Westchester were called removalists because they wanted to remove the county seat from Chester. And the Chesterites were called anti-removalists. So John Harper's leading the anti-removalists up to Westchester. And they ended up on a place called Quaker Hill. They brought artillery. They were going to tear down this courthouse. A farmer named John Hannum, who thought he was going to sell the county the land for the new courthouse, who led the anti-removalists. Jody, this redefines the term Civil War,
yes,
doesn't it?
Yeah,
between two townships,
right,
or two counties
right.
Anyway.
Now, John Hannum got the legislature to decree that the new courthouse would be built 1.5 miles from Goshen, thinking that he would sell them his land. However, his land was 2 miles from Goshen, so he didn't do that. But he gathers up the removalists, and he takes them to the new courthouse. They fortify the walls, and they're all there behind the walls with their guns, ready to shoot the anti-removalists. The anti-removalists show up and erect their artillery on a nearby hill. And then somehow, I don't know exactly how, cooler heads prevailed. And they called off the war. And they went to the local tavern, the Turk's Head Tavern, to have a beer and celebrate. And they shot off the artillery just to celebrate. So, but the county is still one county at this point.
Jody, just thinking of a modern day analogy, this would be a similar version of what you're describing would be a baseball game between Ridley and Brookhaven or Nether Providence, where a brawl was about to break out, but they all go out and have a beer instead.
Yes, right. It would be, yeah. But keep in mind the county is still one county at this point. A couple of years later, the state legislature votes to separate the counties and create the new Chester County, which is the Chester County we know of today. So now we have a new Delaware County, which was the old Chester County, but Chester is still the county seat of the new Delaware County. But at this point, the jail and the courthouse are horribly dilapidated, and so the folks of Chester just never wanted to fix them up, raise the money to renovate them. So by the 1840s, the people are talking about relocating the county seat. There was a meeting of various municipal leaders at another tavern. I think it was the White Horse Tavern in Middletown in 1845. And so they voted to petition the legislature to let them establish a county seat there near Middletown. So that's how media came about.
Jody, these people that you're talking about, who are the early residents back in this 18th century?
Okay. Well, there were, when William Penn came, the Swedes that lived in the area peacefully integrated with Penn's Woods. It came under English rule. He brought hundreds of Quakers, English Quakers, to Delaware County, to Philadelphia, and they fanned out and they established the towns, the boroughs and towns that we know today. They were farmsteads and villages: Thornbury, Birmingham, Newtown, Darby, Havertown, or Haverford, Chester, the upper Nether, and Providence. Providence is this little crossroads that became Media, right there at 252 and Baltimore Pike, where the John Minchell house is. John Minchell was a very early settler, and he was a Quaker, and he had let the Quakers meet in his house for many years, and then he gave them the land to build the Providence Quakers meeting. In addition to the English Quakers who had spread out all over the county, there were a group of Welsh Quakers who had hoped to settle in Philadelphia, but they weren't allowed to, so they were sent to the western part of the county and established Haverford, Bryn Mawr, Tredeffrin. Those Welsh name places up along the main line. So, and they were part of the western countyans who found it very, very difficult to get to Chester, and were always threatening to leave Chester County and go to Montgomery County. But still, Chester remained the county seat for another 50 years. It was, in addition to being the county seat, where all the legal and political things were carried out, it was also on the Delaware River waterfront, and that made it very important. From the very beginning, there was shipbuilding, there were iron foundries, there was chandlers, there was all kinds of commerce between England and America, this part of America. And Chester was a vibrant part of that.
How did the rest of Delaware County geography shape the county's early development?
Well, you know, I mentioned that there were no navigable rivers, but there were 4 creeks: Darby Creek, Chester Creek, Crum Creek, and Ridley Creek. And at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, these creeks became home to hundreds of mills. You had woolen mills, you had cotton mills, you had tobacco mills, every kind of mill, everything that could be driven by water power was established on those creeks. And that led to, you know, the development of the whole county throughout the 19th century.
Jodine, share with us a little about the early economy.
Well, as I said, the Industrial Revolution ushered in all of the mills along the creeks. And one of the very early mill owners was Thomas Leiper, whose house you can visit just right over here in Nether Providence, who started a quarry, and he had a tobacco mill, and he might have had a cotton or woolen mill as well. But for the quarry, he needed to get the stones down to Crum Creek to transport into Chester for shipment. And so he started the very first railroad in Delaware County, maybe one of the earliest railroads anywhere. It was a horse-drawn affair, pulling these big carts full of rocks, probably something like a quarter of a mile down to the Crum Creek, where they could be loaded into barges to take down to Chester. And then, you know, throughout the 19th century, there were roads developing as well. First, the original road was the Queens Highway that went from Philadelphia down to Baltimore, which is now the Chester Pike. And then the Baltimore Pike came through from Philadelphia, passed through the middle of the county, also on its way to Baltimore. And the Westchester Pike was being built out to Westchester. So after the county separated, all of these roads, most of these roads were just, for Delaware County, they were just for people passing through. And the county couldn't afford to maintain the roads, so then they got permission from the legislature to make them into turnpikes, where you had to pay every so often to travel on these roads, so that enabled them to maintain the roads. Of course, the roads led to the development of more towns. Ridley Park, Media itself actually was, you know, on the Baltimore Pike.
Had a different name back then first, correct?
Media? Yes. Media, Thomas Minshall, one of the early settlers, called it Providence. The Quakers had quaint naming devices. Either they named it for themselves, like Thornberry, or they named it for something out of the Bible, like Bethel, Providence, you know, names like that. Concord. And so that was Providence. There was an Upper Providence and there was a Lower Providence, and they were located along what was called the Great Providence Road that started, very early on. I think the road was chartered in 1683. And the reason it was called the Great Providence Road was it was wide enough for a wagon. And that's where Minshall settled.
Jodine, you said Chester was the original county seat,
Mm-hmm.
and then at some time there was a transfer to Media. Tell us the circumstances that led to that change. Okay.
Well, I mentioned that at one point when they were building the new courthouse out in Westchester, the county was still the county seat. The county was still one county, and Chester was still the county seat. But when Chester thought that the county seat was going to be in Westchester, they sold the county courthouse and jail to a man named Curlin, for whom Curlin Street is named, for something like William Curlin for £415. And then 2 years later, when the two counties were separated, Chester and Delaware County, and Chester remained the county seat of Delaware County, the county had to buy back the courthouse and the jail from Mr. Curlin, and they bought it back for £693.
You're actually going way back to 1788 and 1789, aren't you?
Yes. So anyway, the separation had occurred in 1789, but people were still complaining about having to travel so far to get to Chester. So when the state legislature approved a new county seat in 1848, 1849, somewhere around then, they established it in between Middletown and the little village of Providence. So they asked people for suggestions about what the name of the new county seat would be, and Minchell Painter, who was a descendant of Thomas Minchell, suggested that it just be called Media, center of the county. And so that's what they did. They called it Media. And they started building in 1850. They were building the courthouse, which if you see the courthouse, if you look at the courthouse, the part that they started building in 1850 is just the center part with the dome, not the two wings. Just the center part.
And the rest was added on later.
And those were added on later. They built the county jail at Broadmeadows out in Middletown. And then people started moving from Chester to Media and building lawyers, doctors, judges. They moved to Media and they started building their own homes. In 1853, there was a fire in a shingle factory in the area, and the whole shingle factory burned down. And after that, the Media declared that only brick buildings could be built in Media. So if you travel through Media today, just take a look around. They're all brick, all down State Street, and all the lawyers' offices, and a lot of the homes are brick for that reason. So, in the meantime, the Baltimore Pike had come by Media, and in the 1850s, the Baltimore, Wilmington, Philadelphia Railroad, and I may have the name of that backwards, maybe Philadelphia, Wilmington, Baltimore, also came by Media. And so that helped spur Media's development immensely.
There was a population growth and change from about 1830 all the way to right after World War II.
Yes.
Can you discuss the development of the county during that time?
Yes. Well, first, of course, there had always been people coming to Chester, including a lot of blacks who came to work in the shipbuilding industry, who came up from the South and had been freed. And in Upper Darby was very dramatic. A lot of Irish immigrants migrated out from Philadelphia to Upper Darby, especially after the 1844 anti-Irish, anti-Catholic riots in Philadelphia. They came to see Upper Darby as a haven. Of course, and then a lot of there were Polish and Italians who moved to both Upper Darby and Chester to work in the various industries. They brought their Catholic churches and their Catholic schools with them. And, sadly, now that so much industry is gone from the county, so too are a lot of Catholic churches and a lot of Catholic schools.
What early industries were available to give people jobs the early years of Delaware County?
Yeah. Well, the mills had continued. There were a lot of mills in Clifton Heights. There's a creek there, and I don't know which creek it is, but there were a lot of mills there. People moved to Upper Darby and Clifton Heights to work in the mills. Then in the 1850s, the Eddystone Printing Company built a big plant in Eddystone and built homes for their workers. During the Civil War, 1864, the Roach Shipbuilding Company started in Chester. That was soon followed by Sunship, the Baldwin Works. The Baldwin Works was a locomotive manufacturing that moved from Philadelphia to Eddystone. And during World War I, built a lot of the Army tanks that we sent over to the front. Scott Paper, later Boeing, Ford, Sikorsky helicopters. They all came into that Ridley, Eddystone, Chester area and provided a heck of a lot of jobs for people. A lot of the workers actually lived in tents, tent cities, especially World War I. And then, housing gradually was either provided for them or, or developers came in and built housing. And there was a lot of housing that was built during World War II in the Ridley, Marcus Hook, Trainer, that area.
You anticipated my next question. Tell me about the towns and housing that was built up, early communities.
Okay, well, the very early communities, mostly the communities along Cobb's Creek there next to Philadelphia, they became, they had the same kind of mixed housing, the row houses, townhouses, that sort of thing, and they became almost indistinguishable from West Philadelphia itself. And you still see that in Yeadon, Darby, in that area. Then, of course, there was, the housing that was built for workers during the wars. So the railroads are coming out of Philadelphia. They're coming down the river, and the one railroad is going by Media. And wherever they built a railroad station, like Ridley Park, Nether Providence, Media, Sharon Hill, those towns, either the railroad moguls themselves or the banks immediately came in, bought up all the farmland within walking distance of the railroad stations, and started building very nice Victorian houses for people. And so the population of Delaware County, because of that, the population of Delaware County went from, I think, 24,000 in 1850 to 110,000 by 1910. And, there were people, lawyers, doctors, people who worked in Philadelphia who could afford these houses. Some of them cost all of $5,000. And there were savings and loans associations where you could borrow the money to.
And back then, that was a lot of money.
That was a lot of money. Yeah. And you still, drive around the county, you still see that all that housing stock is all still there. Especially drive through a Ridley Park.
So there was that big population jump from 1800s to 1910.
Right.
Take us from 1910 right to the end of World War II.
Okay, so it was really the World Wars, both World War I and World War II, that spurred the continuing development of Delaware County. In Springfield was still, for a very long time, late into the 20th century, still largely farmland, and it gradually developed. The western part of the county did not develop, and the western part of the county is still pretty much undeveloped. You see the same farmlands, the same very small places, Thornbury, Birmingham, Bethel, that were always there. They were Quaker farmers, and they had farmsteads, and it just didn't develop, largely because there wasn't the really good transportation, and there wasn't an interest. Urban sprawl didn't start to occur until the end of the 20th century.
What was it about the two world wars that drew workers to Delaware County?
Well, of course, Chester and Eddystone and all of the river communities were the arsenal of democracy. They were building the ships and the munitions. In 1917, there was a huge explosion in an Eddystone munitions factory. They killed 130 people. To this day, they don't know if that was sabotage. And to this day, there are some bodies of that explosion who have never been identified. A lot of them were immigrant women working at that munition factory. So it was the two world wars that spurred both the industrial growth and housing in this part of the county, in that Chester, Eddystone river, what we call the river wards part of the county.
And people didn't just come from the city of Philadelphia to get those jobs. You had people coming from down south too, right, Jody?
Down south, yes. Black people from a lot of black people from down south came to Chester and to work in the factories, and and especially think about World War II. All of the men are gone overseas, and that was the Great Migration from down south to Philadelphia, Chicago, New York, and some of that Great Migration ended up in Chester.
Jody, back in the 1830s to end of World War II era, did people go down to the Jersey Shore for their vacation time?
Not so much. I mean, there was a train to Atlantic City in the early 1900s, but a lot of people would spend their summers in Ridley Park. Ridley Park was a big vacation area, had a little lake there, and Media was a huge family vacation area because from its very start in 1850 until the end of Prohibition, it was dry, and so it was very attractive for families. And there were several temperance hotels in Media where families could go and stay. So there was a summer resort aspect to Delaware County.
Jody, we have to take a break,
okay.
But I was hoping you'd stay for some more questions.
All right, I will stay.
We have been here with Jodine Mayberry, and I am your host, Larry DeMarco. Please stay tuned for part 2.